Hey everybody, it's Rabbit. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing a review for this thing. This is the Israeli Zachlam Togger, which is probably one of the least user-friendly vehicles in the entire game. It's certainly a top 10 worst ground vehicle, and that's pretty impressive, but let's see if we can make it work. For starters, let's go with the armor, and that is to say it has absolutely none. It can be 50 cal very easily. There are even some parts of it that normal rifle caliber machine guns can go through. Obviously tank shells will go straight through it. You also have this nice little opening in the roof, so it is in fact an open-topped vehicle, which means it does get overpressured by bombs, rockets, etc. It also has an exposed ammo rack, so sometimes stuff like this can happen, where a teammate just kind of backs into you and kills you, so that's not great. However, the great part to your exposed ammo rack is most of the time it doesn't matter, because the things that generally set off exposed ammo racks are high explosive rounds, heat rounds, bombs, rockets, artillery, stuff that just kind of kills you anyway because you're open topped and don't have any armor, which isn't really a benefit, but we're going with whatever we can at this point. All three of your crew are kind of shoved into this cramped little front compartment. However, it turns out a lot of the enemies of this battle rating are going to be using armor-piercing high explosive, and it turns out your paper-thin armor doesn't really set off the fuses. So if they miss the main crew compartment, and especially if they go into the back of the vehicle while you're driving by, a lot of times they do just not do any damage, so that's not too terribly bad. However, aircraft will absolutely obliterate you. Every aircraft of this battle rating will go straight through you, and because your crew is in a fairly cramped part of the vehicle, if they have good aim, they'll usually wipe you out fairly quickly with a single strafing run. Now, there is one small aspect of the vehicle's durability that I didn't really want to bring up, except it did come up enough that I feel it needs to be mentioned. This vehicle doesn't have a lot of moving parts, and it doesn't look like a tank. It doesn't have any large barrel gun, it doesn't have a turret or anything like that. It just looks like a truck, essentially. So, especially on a lot of urban maps that have background vehicles, it does kind of tend to blend in with the scenery, and people did drive by me a fair bit when playing this vehicle, especially if I wasn't moving at all. So, I don't know, if you have no other option, you might as well try it, but it's not consistent. Moving on to the mobility is actually pretty decent. As a half-track, it can be a little awkward to turn the vehicle around in close quarters sometimes, but overall it does accelerate and move around pretty quickly, especially because you're kind of in the middle of the armor meta, so at least relative to the things it fights, its mobility is actually pretty decent and probably one of the stronger aspects of the vehicle. But of course we really have to discuss the firepower, and the firepower is really underwhelming. So we have 6 missiles, exactly 6. We have 4 ready to fire, we have 2 in storage that can reload, and that is it, which means our potential is capped at 6 unless we reload on a capture point. Now, we do have active scouting, so you can get some nice CPs from this, but obviously, getting the best out of these missiles is really going to be the only way you can have any success with these vehicles, so that's going to be the big focus of this video. Now, one thing that's important to understand with any weapon, especially when you have a weapon like this, which is a missile rack, is where do the missiles come from? And it's actually pretty straightforward with this one. They start on the left-hand side of the vehicle, and the reload is actually reasonably fast. Most of the time, by the time you're ready to fire the second missile, it's already been reloaded in the first slot. So often the first 3 missiles will come from the left-hand side, and then it will work its way over to the right. When you reload on a capture point, it will go in the opposite, so it'll go from the right to the left. So just while you are fresh, you want to favor the left-hand side of buildings, whereas when you are close to empty, you want to favor the right-hand side of buildings. Easy enough to remember. Additionally, the actual aiming point that you have for the missiles is actually this little set of binoculars on top of the main crew cabin, which is kind of interesting because that means you can aim the missiles pretty efficiently without ever getting your vehicle out of cover at all, so you can use hills really effectively, especially because the missiles can actually pilot down pretty easily, so that's at least one selling point of the vehicle. Now, one of the awkward parts of this vehicle in terms of just targeting the missiles is that these are manual command line of sight, or MCLOS, and most missiles in the game are semi-automatic command line of sight, or SACLOS. The big difference in game between these two is that MCLOS missiles are piloted using the vehicle's movement controls, whereas SACLOS is piloted using the aiming controls. So for the normal SACLOS missiles, you just put your crosshair on the target and the missile will try to fly there. MCLOS missiles, you're kind of flying it like you would an RC plane with your movement controls, and this can get very awkward, especially when you start getting depth perception at longer ranges. However, Gaijin implemented a change to M-close missiles a while back because people were just flying them into the ground constantly, because a lot of them just start pointed straight up or at an angle. So Gaijin actually implemented a change with M-close missiles where the first second or so of their flight time, they're actually SAC-close. They will go to where you're aiming, and then they will transfer over to M-close controls after that. And here we're going to show a clip in which we essentially I am aiming with the SAC-close, the aiming controls, off to the right hand side, and I have my movement controls to the left hand side. So as soon as it turns left, you'll notice that's when the controls kick in for the movement controls. So my advice to anybody using this vehicle or any vehicle that uses M-close missiles, take advantage of that SAC-close window. The SAC-close window is probably the best bet to try and get your missiles accurately on target. So if you aim the entire vehicle at the target, and then you put your crosshair on the target, the missile will basically start going towards the enemy, and then you can just make corrections instead of trying to manually fly the missile by hand. So that will actually make your experience with this vehicle significantly easier and allow you to line up better hits at close and medium range. As far as the missiles themselves, they have a decent amount of explosive mass. They have actually a lot of penetration for a 6.7 weapon anyway. The biggest issue you're going to have is some of the beefier German heavies that have really big crew compartments with spaced out crews. It can take multiple hits to take them down, just because it's hard to knock out all of their crew or their ammo with a single shot. That being said, one big usability feature this has over several of the other ground vehicles using SS-11s, most of the ground vehicles use SS-11 or similar missiles, fire them upwards in an arc so they can't hit things directly in front of them. The Zachlam Togger actually fires them pretty close to 0 degrees, so it can actually hit things in incredibly close proximity right in front of it, and you can kind of shotgun it at close quarters. It's not advisable, obviously, because you're weak against literally everything, but in an emergency, you could do worse, and it is rather amusing, so I would definitely recommend giving it a shot if you're out of options. Now, as far as how you're going to want to use it in terms of positioning, it's actually pretty straightforward. Medium range behind some kind of a horizontal cover so that you can poke the little binoculars over it. You can shoot enemies. You have a very low silhouette while doing this. At medium range, you're also kind of at that sweet spot where you can consistently land shots on targets. At close range, you're vulnerable to everything, but in a pinch, you can use it and shotgun people with the missiles. At long range, though, this thing really struggles. These missiles are incredibly slow. You need a lot of corrections to hit a target, and a lot of times they'll just accidentally wander out of your line of sight. And when you only have 6 missiles, you really can't afford to miss. So long range was ironically the worst for this vehicle in my experience. I had way more success at close range than long range. As far as my personal thoughts on the Zachlam Togger, I actually don't completely hate it. So the big thing about this vehicle is that obviously it's not a meta vehicle, it's not a great vehicle. You don't really expect to get kills, and you definitely don't expect to get multiple kills. But this also means you kind of go into a game with no expectations, especially of yourself. If you go into a game with a really good, competent vehicle, you might be expecting to do well, or at least get some kills before getting taken out. Whereas the Togger is who cares? So I did find it to be kind of a relaxing vehicle, and it is satisfying to get kills, especially if you're shotgunning people at close range with it. And one thing I will say is there's always a fine line between bad and tedious. Vehicles that are tedious are just, it's a chore to get them into position, it's a chore to get their guns on target, it's just not fun. I didn't completely hate the Togger, I didn't think it was a chore. It wasn't particularly good, but the kills were satisfying, and it was a nice, fun, relaxing vehicle. I continued playing it after I got footage for this video because I just kind of enjoyed it. It was relaxing. I can't honestly speak for everyone else, though. Obviously, what you individually are going to find tedious versus bad is going to be very subjective, and I could definitely see with the Zachlam Togger and the way it works, how a lot of people would find it particularly tedious. But for what it's worth, I did kind of enjoy it as a nice little relaxing vehicle to screw around with. I did actually like playing it more than the QN506, hilariously enough, so that's at least one thing. And that concludes our video on the Zachlam Togger. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you have a fun time. Hope you at least learned enough to get the vehicle spaded, hopefully. Maybe you have some fun with it too, who knows. If you want to see videos on other vehicles, let me know. Otherwise, like, comment, subscribe. Always appreciated. Have a nice day, everybody.